Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Gerber Knives Highbrow. First off though, full disclosure, I want to thank Gerber for sending this guy along. They reached out to me, said, hey, you want to check one of these guys out? I said, absolutely, but I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They still sent it along. Nonetheless, we have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever. And I'm doing my best not to let this affect the nature of my review. Next thing, size comparison. This is not a terribly large knife here. What we can see here is size-wise next to the Ontario Rat number 2. Blade length effectively is about the same. Spyderco Delica. Again, effective blade length, right about the same. Not a huge knife right here. Then on the larger side here it is against the Spyderco PM2. So yeah, it's a pretty reasonably sized little knife right here. And so there you go, at least by my particular standards. However, one part of the size that is a little unexpected is the thickness. This is a thick boy. We bring this guy next to the Spyderco Delica. Yeah, it's thick. Next to the Spyderco PM2. Yeah, it's thick. Whatever metal these scales are here is very, very, very thick. So this ends up being a very chunky knife in the pocket. And so, yeah, there you go. Next thing, this is a very weird knife. Some of you are probably wondering what the heck is going on here. This is a sliding bar style lock. Very reminiscent of the Benchmade Axis lock, although, of course, that mechanism is now out of copy or patent or whatever intellectual property thing they're using. But it's got that. It is an assisted pocket knife. So that means that when you bring the blade out just a little bit farther, it bounces the rest of the way out using an internal spring, and it has a safety switch in the back here. With it in this position, you can press the flip at that, nothing's happening, slide it back over here, and the 100% flies open. So there you go. And then finally, this is going to be a quick review because, yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about what I'm liking here and what I'm not liking so much. On the good side, to start with, I like the fact that you've got, this is kind of a weird thing. I don't think I've seen it before, but they are finishing the knife with 2 different finishes. In the back here, it appears to have been blasted, but on the front, it appears to have sort of, this is probably just the finish off of the machine, or maybe they tried to do a quick rudimentary hand sanding, but as a result, you end up with a little bit more contrast and interest on the knife, and the knife ends up feeling a little bit more grippy. This finish here is a little slippery. This, I think, has a little bit more gription to it, and so that's kind of a cool approach. I hadn't seen that before. Figured I'd highlight it. Next thing, you've got a couple of, well, actually, you've got the blue, and the blue is actually kind of non-traditional. Generally speaking, Gerber doesn't, well, a lot of folks, especially on the budget end, don't do many of that. I mean, they've got black, they've got gray, they've got OD green, but it's kind of nice to see a color that's a little off the beaten path available for, called urban blue, I believe was the term. So, yeah. Next thing, this is a truly ambidextrous knife. What I mean by that is that a left-handed person is going to have exactly the same ability to manipulate the knife as a righty, because you can swap the clip over to the left-hand side. And the sliding lock bar here is accessible from both sides. The safety is accessible from both sides, and so a lefty will have exactly the same experience as a righty with this knife. And that's going to make 10% of my viewers very, very happy. So that's good. Next thing, price point on this guy is $35. In practice, I think they probably went a little low given what they're trying to do here, but it is a solid price point. That's going to make it accessible to a lot more people. The grind on this guy is actually reasonably thin. It comes out to a relatively thin edge, and frankly, I wish that other Gerbers, the fastball specifically, had come out this thin. The cutting performance would have been very much improved, and so I appreciate the thin edge there. And then finally, on the good side, it is outside the norm. By a pretty solid margin, right? An assisted sliding bar lock flipper with a safety is not something that most people are doing. That may be for good reason, I don't know, but at the same time, I appreciate that they stepped outside their comfort zone with this particular knife. So, to me, at least, all of that is the good, is that it's outside the norm. It's got a thin grind. It's got a $35 price point. It's truly ambidextrous with the blue option and the mixed finishing here. On the bad side, unfortunately, there's a lot of bad here, and I'm just going to kind of give a quick summary because I don't want to pile on. This assembly of this guy was an odyssey, and it wasn't a fun odyssey. You have 7CR steel, which is just, no, probably not at this point. It's 2020. That's not something you're getting away with for much longer. It's got vertical blade play, unfortunately. I was able to get the horizontal play out of it, but the vertical play isn't going away. And I believe that the sliding bar lock is sort of at its furthest extent here. And so that's why we're getting that vertical play. Then maybe it's the springs aren't strong enough. Like, I don't know. But either way, the blade on this guy almost looks recurved. They've gone a little bit too over-enthusiastic with the sharpening. Part of that is because they didn't get the sharpening choil right. It doesn't go out far enough. But still, that's not great. And then the broken screw during the disassembly, that's not good. I think the broken screw was actually there already to start. Overall, unfortunately, there were a lot of corners cut here, and it kind of shows. I mean, and even the lock is very hard to keep in the unlocked position. It very much wants to, even if you try and swing it back real quick, it tends to bounce. I could go on, but I don't really need to, honestly. So to me, at least, that's what I'm talking about for the bad, is that it's got the broken screw thing, the recurved sharpening, the vertical blade play, 7CR steel, and the disassembly was just... oof. Final conclusion, it's probably apparent to you that I'm not going to recommend this knife. I mean, look, even at $35, there are just way too many compromises here, with poor build quality, a low-quality steel, poor sharpening. I mean, and honestly, even just the assist for me. One of my Patreon patrons kind of summed it up. A guy named Brian M. said, I posted a picture of this after disassembly, and he said in my patron Discord, that is, and he said, the Highbrow, I saw it, thought it looked good, saw it was assisted, checked my calendar, saw it's 2020, then I said, nah. And I think there's something real to that. I think moving towards assists in 2020 is sort of the wrong direction, at least in my estimation. Very many people are starting to view them as what I think in most cases they actually are, which is sort of a hack to overcome relatively poor pivot. And so moving to an assist is not necessarily where I'd go now. Honestly, my biggest issue with this knife is it kind of feels like it was designed by an accountant, right? Somebody looked at this and said, people are saying they want all these things. Market research says they want X, Y, Z, and I want a $35 price tag. China, make it happen. And then they sent it off to a Chinese factory. They sent, those desires or something off to a Chinese factory, and they got it under $35, but sort of at what cost? In a lot of ways, those sorts of approaches, or at least that kind of feeling that you get off, ends up with something that feels like it was kind of cheapened to death. You end up with compromises like 7CR, assists, and blade play, cheap screws, that weirdly thick, heavy metal handle. I mean, it's heavy too. This is not a great example of a $35 knife. And this is very different than some of the knives that are coming specifically out of like Chinese companies, where it's like they are designing the knife from the ground up to be at that price point. They're making something that is simpler, but they're doing something that can be done very well at $35 rather than trying to cram something pretty complex into a price point that they can't really deliver that well. So I appreciate very much that they went off the beaten path. In a way, that's the reason that you're seeing this review rather than just that was going to be a bloodbath. That's the thing that makes this at all interesting, and that's the reason I'm talking about it at all. The world is packed to the gills with, just random line of lock flippers, right? There were a billion of those out there. The world does not have that many sliding bar lock knives. It's nice to see it. It's a good innovation, and if it was done a little bit better, I could see that being something interesting. Throwing the safety in there, it's not something that's commonly done, and I think in many ways for good reasons, but I think it's also it's interesting. I mean, they did something that is very, very far from the pack, so to speak. And I think in some ways it is more honorable, and it's more interesting when a company falls down trying to do something pretty unique here. There are not that many knives out there like this one. So I appreciate that. And in some ways, I appreciate that it's not just another perfectly forgettable, line of lock, some of the stuff that's coming out these days. Like, I don't even know if the factory remembers having made them. But anyways, I appreciate that they went off the beaten path. And so it's an interesting knife. And at some level, I like the moxie involved in shipping something like this. But I am afraid that this little guy should probably keep you browsing. Get it? Highbrow? Browsing? Yeah. Anyways, yeah. There you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.